Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we have another special comment on the recent development that Kacey Musgraves will be touring with Katy Perry. At first glance, it seems to make absolutely no sense. A headline that suggests that the opening act for Katy Perry, one of the biggest pop stars in the past couple of years, will be Kacey Musgraves, a critically acclaimed but not exactly widely known country singer-songwriter. Kacey Musgraves, who hasn't had a hit on the country charts, rise higher than number 14 on country radio. At first glance from the pop landscape, it makes absolutely no sense. And from the country landscape, it makes even less. Kacey Musgraves' album, Same Trailer, Different Park, wasn't a huge commercial smash in comparison with the bro country that she railed against last year, but it was a critical one, landing on several critical top 10 lists, including mine at number 3. She's a singer-songwriter who has a reputation for organic, Americana-inspired country that openly attacks traditional values with sharply written, well-composed lyrics that won her New Artist of the Year at the Country Music Awards. So what on earth is she doing touring with Katy Perry, one of the most shallow, ephemeral pop acts of recent memory? Why is her label, Mercury Nashville, pairing her outside of the country genre altogether instead of one of the many other artists signed through the label, or even on Universal Music Group Nashville as a whole? Those questions has gotten some country music fans a little bit worried about Kacey Musgraves' future. Now, the funny thing is that, from my point of view, I can't see a real downside to this decision on any front. And to explain that, I'm going to need to discuss the careers of not just Kacey Musgraves and Katy Perry, but of a third female act who also plays a part in the story, and how these results can only be positive for everybody involved in the long run. And for once, it was a very shrewd and actually kind of brilliant business decision on behalf of Mercury Nashville. So okay, let's start with Kacey Musgraves and take a look at her recent tours over the past year. Before her album, she toured with Lady Antebellum and was writing songs for Miranda Lambert, which inevitably got the push she needed to drop her major label debut, Same Trailer, Different Park, in March of 2013. She debuted at number 1 on the country charts and sold a decent 42,000 records her first week, which wasn't stellar in comparison with some of the bro country smashes of later in the year. But here's where we get a glimpse at Mercury Nashville's first big miscalculation, which I've mentioned in a previous video. The album that she was up against was Justin Timberlake's The 2020 Experience, a comeback album from one of the biggest names in pop music that went on to sell almost 1 million records that week alone. Despite critical acclaim, Kacey wouldn't have had a prayer of beating JT that week, and her label, they really should have known that. Instead, unfortunately, they made the second big miscalculation. They paired her as an opening act with Kenny Chesney. Frankly, I couldn't think of a worse pairing when it comes to tone, and especially when you compare the crowds that would appreciate Kacey Musgraves' brand of sharp songwriting with the archetypal Kenny Chesney fan, which falls along the line of Jimmy Buffett fans with a lot more beer and belligerence. What it did mean is that outside of hardcore country fans and critics, Kacey Musgraves would have had difficulty connecting with fans in that audience. And it didn't help matters that the summer and fall of 2013 were overrun with bro country, leaving no room for smarter, more emotionally informed, or even just female acts on country radio. That included acts like Taylor Swift or Carrie Underwood. There wasn't anything that she could really do to stop that. It's hard for lone voices to stand up against an avalanche, especially when said avalanche sells as well as it did. So okay, let's think about this from Mercury Nashville's point of view. They know that they've got a major talent on their hands with Kacey Musgraves, but her material isn't really catching on with a wider audience, at least on country radio. Maybe it's because Kacey Musgraves' material is too transgressive for traditional country, or maybe her quieter style wasn't an easy fit for amidst the horde of bro country acts, or maybe it's just because she's too smart for mainstream radio. That happens. But Mercury Nashville seems to have found a path that I was championing almost a year ago when I reviewed Same Trailer, Different Park. Push her towards a pop audience and place her in direct competition with the golden girl herself, Taylor Swift, who has effectively left the female pop country position and gone full Hollywood, leaving a vacancy behind her. If country music won't accept Kacey Musgraves, maybe the pop charts, which have grown more tolerant of indie and especially folk acts over the past few years, maybe they would be a better fit. Now, admittedly, this puts a very negative light on modern country radio, as some of their programmers have already spoken up against the stagnation of bro country and its inevitable collapse when the bubble bursts. But really, that's not Kacey Musgraves' problem. She needs to be be focused on her own career, and country music will start programming her music when it's ready. But why does Mercury Nashville think pushing Kacey towards Katy Perry is a good idea, or that her material might succeed on pop radio at all? Well, at this point, we need to bring in our third female pop singer, Lorde, the New Zealand teenager whose surprise hit Royals ruled the pop charts in the latter half of 2013, mostly by being smarter and completely denouncing vapid pop music. In fact, if you look at a deeper look at the pop charts this year, there were a fair number of songs that seemed to have greater lyrical ambition, with a tilt towards discussing social change amongst young people. Macklemore's Thrift Shop and Can't Hold Us were some of the biggest hits of the year, and Same Love wasn't far behind. And this year, 2014, with Adele's newest release on the horizon and Lorde's song Team rising up on the charts, this trend doesn't seem to be changing, at least not immediately. But back to Lorde, she also plays one other very important role in this story. She refused to tour with Katy Perry, citing concerns that it just wasn't right for her. In fact, Lorde has managed to convince her label to give her space and time to finish the next record that she wants to make, because that's what getting a #1 hit and a debut album that breaks gold allows you to do. Now, do y'all see the parallel yet? Like Kacey Musgraves, Lorde has the full backing and support of her label in the creation and marketing of her music. They want her to be a major success. And with Lorde's minimalist style, sharp lyrics, and very distinctive vocals, one could make the argument that she'd be harder to market than Kacey Musgraves would be, especially to pop radio. And yet Lorde succeeded, which raises an interesting question. Given the rise of country's acceptance within the mainstream, why couldn't Kacey Musgraves step out as the country counterpart to Lorde on pop radio? Could it be that a pop audience would be more receptive to Kacey Musgraves' Americana-inspired country over country radio itself? Could she find success there? Well, it's certainly a possibility, but that still doesn't answer the biggest question of all. Why Katy Perry of all people? If you're looking to promote towards a pop audience, why wouldn't Mercury Nashville just push her old singles for pop radio instead of pushing her to tour with Katy Perry? An act that seems to be the antithesis of the depth, intellect, and maturity that Kacey would bring to the table. Well, at this point, we need to take a look at Katy Perry's most recent release, Prism, an album that I didn't especially like, but one that was epitomized by Katy Perry's search for depth and spirituality. But that sort of songwriting is pretty hard work, and you could tell that it was difficult for Katy Perry and her handlers to make this sort of material. At the very least, that album seemed to indicate that Katy Perry wanted to transition from making lightweight pop music into something that was a little bit more deep, and to receive more serious consideration as a musical artist. And here's where the story gets bigger, because Katy Perry isn't the only female pop star who feels that her creative process in making her music has been compromised. Lady Gaga recently fired her management because she felt they had been micromanaging her most recent album to its detriment, and they didn't allow her to go further in the artistic direction she was looking to explore. Kesha's conflicts with Dr. Luke have been even worse, where Kesha leaked her demo version of Dirty Love with a video she directed herself after a notoriously troubled recording process that included a lot of verbal abuse from the producer, along with a brutal contract that led to the very stupid cancellation of her collaboration album with the Flaming Lips. Katy Perry has also had a troubled relationship with Dr. Luke as well. Could it be that she's looking to tour and collaborate with different singers and then better songwriters, that she might improve her own skills so she doesn't need the pop songwriting machine in the same way? Like, I mean, why else would she look to tour with Lorde or Kacey Musgraves, who are both great songwriters but aren't remotely close to Katy Perry's pop style? Wouldn't you want an opening act who is a good match for the style and tempo of your main attraction? That just seems to make sense in terms of good presentation. So, okay, let's circle back to the big question. Who wins here? Well, Katy Perry obviously wins. In the best case, she gets to improve her songwriting skills working with one of the best in modern country music, and at worst, will have an opening act who won't exactly upstage her in spectacle. Kacey Musgraves, believe it or not, she also manages to win here. She gets the chance to perform to a much bigger audience than she'd ever reach touring independently, and an audience who have younger fans who might be more receptive to her style of music, and a demographic who will likely be more receptive to the conscientious music given the most recent changes on the pop charts. She has the opportunity to step up and take the female country starlet position that Taylor Swift left behind, and she's smart enough not to compromise her integrity. This is something that I feel that a lot of country fans are unnecessarily worried about. Kacey's not about to engage in the wild spectacle of Katy Perry's show, and certainly not in her music. Remember, Katy Perry's likely she's trying to learn from Kacey Musgraves, not the other way around. Furthermore, Kacey Musgraves is a smart woman. She's worked with Shane McAnally and Brandy Clark, and her label isn't about to push her entirely towards pop and compromise her country sound. Why? Well, for one, Mercury Nashville, they're a country label, and two, because if they're smart, they will have realized that bro country won't last, and something is going to need to fill the gap in the meantime. And they are fully capable of pushing Kacey Musgraves to both pop and country radio simultaneously, along with her touring with Katy Perry to enrich her to that larger audience. That way, they hedge their bets. Bro country fades, Kacey can step up, or she makes points on the pop charts, which will inevitably bleed onto mainstream country radio. So, okay, what happens if Mercury Nashville aren't smart and they want to push Kacey towards selling out in the vein of Taylor Swift, and by extension use the Katy Perry tour as coercion here? Well, keep in mind it's a worst case scenario, but think that a lot of Kacey Musgraves' appeal is at least different than that of Taylor Swift, or at least what Taylor Swift was. Kacey might be gorgeous, but her image has never been the selling point behind her music, and she doesn't quite aim at the same teenage audience with her more provocative subject matter. If her label pushes her towards that sort of demographic, well, I can see it going in one of two ways. Number one, either Kacey fights like hell and she gets sidelined by label conflicts, arguably the worst situation, or B, she opts to subvert the system like Chumbawamba did in the mid to late 90s and release some blisteringly sharp satire lampooning the whole pop star process. However, I don't see this situation as likely because it wouldn't play to either of the changing climates in pop or country radio, with stupid bro country on the decline and acts with more maturity and depth continuing to do well on pop radio, facts of which Mercury Nashville are very much aware. Furthermore, it wouldn't play to Kacey Musgraves' critical strengths. In an era where critical opinions seem to have more and more clout in convincing people to buy records, Mercury Nashville would be extremely unwise to throw that critical clout away with pandering to a pop audience. And if Kacey Musgraves walks away with any country music Grammys of the 4 she's nominated with this year, the label would be even more hesitant to touch her. So, you know what? In the end, I can't help but feel that the pairing of Kacey Musgraves and Katy Perry, it's not such a bad idea after all. In fact, I think it's kind of inspired. The sort of win-win that will pay dividends for both acts down the road. Yeah, country radio might take a hit in the short term, especially if this works and the label realizes that they don't need to rely exclusively on country radio for a hit artist. But that hit strikes me as only being in the short term, as I said, because bro country will eventually go away when the bubble bursts, and there will be room for singer-songwriters like Kacey Musgraves to fill up the chart, especially if she smashes through on pop radio and becomes a breakout popular success. And you know what, hell, if Katy Perry picks up some chops and becomes a better songwriter and makes better music, maybe I'll be able to like her next album more than I did. Either way, as long as cool heads and some decent intelligence prevail and nobody does anything monumentally stupid and panics, I've got a good feeling about this creative direction. So country music fans, don't panic. Kacey Musgraves is gonna be just fine. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's any albums you'd like me to talk about, or if there's any major issues in music you'd like me to address in some way, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. Until then, see you next time.